I'm Jason Bruges, founder and creative director of Jason Bruges Studio.
And I'm Richard Roberts, and I'm the MD and design director of Jason Bruges Studio.
So, Jason Bruges Studio, just to give you some context, is an art studio in London, and we create site-specific media artworks for the built environment. The work is inspired by natural systems, naturally people, and uses a technological palette. So we're interested in sort of biomimicry, ecologies, natural environments, people's behaviour, spatial interactions, and use of technology for good. We tell stories and respond to sites. The studio develops the work in London, very hands-on approach by a multidisciplinary team. So we're delighted to be here today to tell you about digital philataxy. It's the ambitions, how it's delivered, and what we achieved. Here's a glimpse of the piece from beneath. We received the brief in 2017 from our commissioner, Hankook Tire, for their headquarters in Pangyo in Seoul, to create an immersive, dynamic, innovative, integrated artwork which would complement the building and its workplace interiors designed by Foster & Partners. We joined at scheme design, where we were starting to identify locations which would create impressions on the journey into the building. And we identified a location which, as a placeholder, there was a smoke screen. And we created a site-specific response to this location. So there's this kind of journey, and we wanted to create a kind of a grand arrival sequence for visitors to the building. Oops. Hankook were keen to align the artwork with their innovative spirit and wanted to create an environment which would attract a talent to the building. Here you can see some of the brand movies we watched to immerse ourselves into the culture of spherical wheels, driverless cars, dynamic tyre treads, and exotic racing rubber compounds. Here is an analytic diagram which starts our conceptual process by analysing the split levels in the building. And we realised there'd be striking views from level 1 and level 6 of the artwork. And we started to think about what sort of natural environments have these split level views, like clouds, arboreal environments, and water environments. We settled on the idea of a tree crown, this sort of kind of canopy concept, which allowed us to create a piece which had different experiences from above and below. And of course, something that could change, and we were inspired by local trees in Seoul itself. We speculated on how local effects of the wind and the weather, coming from Weather API, could affect the piece, bringing the outside inside, and how that would work at a macro and micro scale. These are some initial sketches where we're starting to integrate liquid crystal shutters into this smoke screen. And this technology is something we've used several times to create variable transparencies. Rich is going to tell you a little bit about the design process.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, so once we'd established the conceptual direction and the technical palette, we started to look at how we could arrange the leaves in a form to create a notional canopy. We started with a double curved planar surface. Next, we started to look at the actual leaves themselves. In addition to the LCD shutter leaves, which obscure light, we looked to develop leaves that emit light by using an edge-lit polymer. We hoped that by controlling these elements in combination, it would be possible to simulate the effect of sunlight passing through a canopy. We quickly realised that the best effects were generated when we actually started to layer these things over one another, and therefore it was necessary to add depth and volume to the piece. Initial structural analysis suggested we'd need a ring beam to create the space for the escalator to pass through. But we didn't really want to do that, so we proposed a series of catenary structures to get rid of it and therefore resemble a much more natural canopy whilst keeping the nodes as visible as possible as you move through it. Now the catenary cables are the primary structure, we revisited the secondary structure to see how these could be arranged to form depth and volume. The challenge was to repeat as many of the components as we possibly could, but arrange them in such a way that they did not appear regular or repeated. Getting the overall density of the nodes right was really critical. Too sparse and a primary structure would become too prominent and too dense, and it prevented us from having views from through the piece from above and below. At the same time, we were developing the individual nodes. So these early mock-ups explored the form and functionality of the liquid crystal shutters and the light-emitting panels. It's important to get details like color functionality correct as we were doing this. And as the project progressed, we needed to develop the components and the details according to what the local fabricator can manufacture in their facility. Jumping back across scales, we wanted to place the light nodes towards the center to ensure that the LCD shutters were nice and visible. But here it wasn't working so well because it was really bright in the middle and you could see the structure around the edge. So this diagram shows the buildup of the leaves, the twigs, the branches, and the initial structural design. 16 meters in diameter, there were 40 suspension cables for a piece that weighed 2.2 tons. To reduce the weight where possible, we decided to work with aluminium because it's widely machinable, locally available, is of recycled origin, and could be recycled again in the future compared to working with, say, carbon fiber or plastic composites. The next challenge was to find a way to interface with the escalator itself, and our proposed solution was to modify the catenary system to create a natural void for the escalator to pass through. The local architect again proposed some beams, which we kind of had to have a bit of an argument with them about, but we got there. This resulted in a final primary structure design, and the next challenge was to figure out a way we could integrate all the required power and data cabling in such a way that it was also seamless. We do a lot of prototyping in the studio, and the next step was to build a one-to-one prototype. We actually built one to prove to the local manufacturer that it would be possible, particularly when it comes to integrating the control hardware into the structural rods themselves. And so the next step was to select part of the artwork for the local fabricator to make. We chose this bit, and this is the prototype that they built, which is a little bit more refined. But it really provided us opportunities to measure the functionality and test against the original concept references. So even in installation, the kind of innovation didn't stop. We were using water bottles suspended from a catenary structure here to pre-tension the cables and get the drops right. And this is during installation, so it was important that we were testing the stuff as it was going in. I'll now hand back over to Jason to talk about the commissioning.
Yeah, it was an interesting project to commission. We'd had a physical install by the time the pandemic started, but then we built a digital twin of the piece, and then also we spent a lot of time looking at the piece via a network of cameras in the building in order to work out how the sort of living artwork would come to life. And this is the view looking from the reception, where we had sort of trigger points which would trigger different sorts of activities. So we were testing sort of different types of interaction. We were testing different colours, which is quite hard to see remotely over cameras. One member of the studio has since seen the piece, so still yet to see the exact coloration and saturation. For different seasons, we've got different colours. There's an algorithm that slowly changes a seasonal bias. As I said, we pick up both movement from the escalator, but we also pick up weather data from an API. So I'm going to play a short movie that shows you the kind of final install piece. And this is the only way we've actually seen the work. So this isn't a visualization, which we've been asked. This was filmed during the pandemic when there weren't many building occupants. We feel the artwork complements the interior atrium. The transparent voxel, which is a sort of volumetric pixel system, is read very well against the rhythms and texture of the interior space. Collaboration between us, Hankook Tire, Foster and Partners, Changzhou, the executive architect, Alto, who are the design and build contractor for all the architectural lighting. A lot of our works we build ourselves, but we built aspects of this. We built the liquid crystal system and the software and oversaw the installation. The space and the artwork have been featured in several K-dramas over the last year, and it's been adopted into the City of Pangyo art collection. Thank you very much for your time. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. It's interesting, when I saw the pictures of it, in fact, that view of it, there was a bit of a trick of the eye. I thought it was more three-dimensional in that it rose up through that bigger atrium. I hadn't appreciated it is sort of three-dimensionally two-dimensional in that it's a plane that you move through. That was obviously intentional, but did you consider an installation that was took up more of the atrium, or were there constraints that you couldn't do that?
I think we did look at different depths, but yeah, there were certainly constraints in terms of access and movement around the atrium. It's about 3 meters deep, the piece, so there's a certain depth to it. And it would have been nice potentially for it to be deeper, but yeah, it was mainly constraints around access to the other floor edges.
Architects were always preoccupied about lifespan of our endeavours. I imagine in your field it must be one of the frustrations that very often these aren't pieces that have a long, as long a span of life as maybe the buildings they're a part of. Have you considered not only sort of the recyclability, but reprogramming? Is it able to be reprogrammed in accordance with maybe sustain a longer life in the building?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually reprogram this on a reasonably regular basis. So with a lot of our artworks, we have an internet connection to the control system, control computer. And so we're constantly tweaking, adapting and changing how it behaves in response to how the occupiers of the building feel it's working for them or not working for them. And so in that way, we can really change its appearance as well. Because of the liquid crystal shutters go from transparent through to opaque, you can really vary the density of it as it is perceived. So make it much more transparent, much less transparent, make it appear more or disappear into the background, which is a nice thing to be able to do digitally and remotely.
In terms of the design life, most of our pieces of work are designed to match the design life of the building, so 20, 25 years plus, up to 50 years. The liquid crystal shutters have a mean time between failures of 100 years. So we know the exact life cycles of all the components, but it's built to be completely deconstructed and recycled if it needs to be.
I'd like to think that building has a longer life than 20, 25 years. But we'll move on that one. Shall we jump to the end, Richard?
You talked about the programming relative to weather and escalator movement, but is it interactive in that a person who is working in the building and coming up the escalator every day could learn to do something, some behavior that would make it change visually?
Yes, it is interactive. So we have a camera feed that's looking at the escalators, and as people come up through it, then the content does change. And so depending on how busy the escalators, how busy the building is, then it's pushing different types of content through the piece as it's coming through as part of the broad range of sequences that it does. It has a number of different effects which overlay over one another at different times, depending on the occupancy of the building, but also the weather outside, the season. It's constantly changing and shifting in that sense.
Yeah, my question is kind of following yours. I was wondering if there is any sort of interaction between the outside elements, maybe the amount of lights that comes into the building or the windy conditions outside.
Yeah,
is there a possibility to link those?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the weather API that we talked about. Is essentially it's a digital feed that's telling us what the weather conditions are outside, and that directly affects how the piece performs. So we have different modes depending on if it's bright and sunny or if it's windy, and again in relation to the seasons. So it's very responsive in that sense.
Yeah, so if there's like a westerly wind, you will literally see textures being blown through the piece that was basically in a real tree outside would be creating the same sort of effect.
Yeah.
So and that's running. We're actually running the piece from its digital twin. So it has a Unity version of it as well, and the data's feeding into that to create the effect.
It's a very nice project. You started with the project with the architect together, or when the hall was there, it was empty, they want to make something?
We were brought in at the end of scheme design, so the building was quite developed, and this was a sort of location where it was considered that would be really kind of interesting to have something that created an experience for the arrival of visitors and employees to the building.
And what was the architect's reaction?
I think the architects have been very complimentary. It's been an ongoing collaborative process in terms of how does the piece sit in juxtaposition to the building, how does it interface with the slab edge, and obviously we sort of updated the details of the kind of raised floor and where we put equipment that would actually drive the installation and that kind of thing.
But you decided all together on one table with the client architect, so how was the...
Yeah, we would have meetings in Seoul with the entire design team, both the Seoul design team and the London-based design team.
At the beginning, you talked about the company and their high-tech rubber and Segway type vehicles, and you talked about being inspired by the trees in Korea. In the finished installation, I find it quite hard to see where the company or Korea is reflected. Obviously, the weather change and the fact that you've got maple leaves turning red that you pick up in the coloration. How do you feel the installation reflects the company and the place?
So, the piece itself is about creating an environment that the building, the light levels, the kind of atrium is sort of all very carefully controlled. There's actually a sort of series of pieces of work. There's another piece beyond it, which is more about the technology they're working with in the dynamic tread. So this piece we kept quite abstract, and there was another piece that was a bit more kind of didactic and descriptive of some of their research, but it's more really aligning the sort of tone of voice of the piece and the kind of qualities of it with the kind of innovation and the research that they're doing.
And in terms of the place, being Korea, again, you intentionally keeping it abstract.
Yeah, in this, it is kept in abstract. I mean, there were references and inspirations coming from local parks, local trees, species that we looked at, ginkgo trees being one tree, for example. But again, that is a bit more abstract in the piece.
And when you finished it, because with these more temporary, it's in a sense, it has a more temporary appearance in the building. Is there anything that you would change or adapt now that it's complete and people are moving through it? Has it come out to do all that you'd hoped it would do, all the things that you'd like to? Because of course you could adapt something like this because you can still control it remotely.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing I would like to do is go and see it. And that's, we will probably change. We will probably, even though the client thinks it's signed off and finished, we will probably go and adjust the software, adjust the colours in the first instance. And I'm pretty certain there'll be physical things I would have liked to have changed based on the fact I haven't seen it as well. But usually would be a lot more hands-on and present in that process.
Great. Well, I think, would you like to come and collect your award?